Hello, beautiful people. This is Venerable Tik Huang Tree on Dharma Tree, and you're listening to Dharma on Demand. So today we will be talking about mantras. So I'm sure everyone has heard the word mantra, and we may associate it with different things. Maybe it's, something we say to ourselves, like karma's a bitch, or it is what it is, like I say quite often, or whatever it may be, right? People have inspirational mantras, motivational mantras, professional mantras, whatever it may be. But the idea behind a mantra is this kind of words of inspiration or words that kind of provoke a certain feeling or mindset or whatever it may be. But in Buddhism, having mantras are definitely no exception. There are quite a few mantras, and there are dozens of them that we as monks and nuns would chant daily. For instance, like the morning chants that we do at 4:30, we chant the Shurangama mantra, which are five mantras, five sections of a mantra, which are very long, and then the compassion mantra, and then the 10 what are called the 10 small mantras. And so that's basically the entirety of the morning service is just chanting these mantras. And so, again, Buddhism is no exception. Some traditions have them more than others. Some even don't have any mantras at all. It just really depends on the tradition, on the lineage, on the practice themselves. But one thing to try to understand or remember or recognize that mantras aren't something like a magic spell, right? It is, however, unfortunately translated as spells sometimes within the sutras and some commentaries. For instance, even in the Lotus Sutra, it's chapter 26, titled Dharanis or Dharanis. And within the English translation, at least, some of the words that are used for mantra or dharani. And dharani is basically a mantra, but a longer version or a more kind of powerful, quote unquote, than a typical mantra. But within that chapter, in the English translation, the one I'm referring to is by Watson, and he translates some of the Sanskrit words, or even the translations that came from Sanskrit to Chinese. And I believe we're doing the Chinese translation here, but some of the word, and even though it's in Chinese or in Sanskrit says mantra dharani, he would keep the original word of dharani within his translations and within that chapter 26. But when it came to the words for mantras, they were unfortunately translated as spells. And so it's not really funny, but I don't enjoy translation. And usually, whenever I'm chanting anything that's kind of outside of our normal chants or services, a lot of times when I'm, discussing or studying sutras, I often transcribe the sutras as I read them. So for any new sutra, for instance, that I study, I always read it the first time, and then I read it a second time to kind of like make some highlights and just make some little book notes within the sutra. And then I'll read it a third time. It's the third time where I would go in and copy the actual sutra. But whenever I do that, I typically try to use several different translations of the sutra so that I can kind of compile my own version. Not to say that the translated versions are, bad or are any good. They are, but a lot of times when I'm studying a particular sutra that I know I may be chanting at one point or sometime in the future, I typically try to use some words that kind of just mesh well together. So that way, when it's chanted, it kind of just sounds nice and smooth. If words are too long or they're like awkwardly pronounced, or most people who don't know how to pronounce some words, or whatever it may be, if you're using these kind of ambiguous words or large words or words that people very subtly use, it doesn't really sound right. It doesn't really roll off the tongue sometimes. So that's one of the main reasons why I typically try to create my own translation of things. And this is especially probably one of my larger projects of retranslating is the Dhammapada. So the Dhammapada is one of those things where I believe I used maybe 3 or 4 translations, including the original Pali text as well. And I probably only changed maybe around 10 to 20% of some of the translations across the board to kind of make it my own. Because again, the Dhammapada is one of those texts that I do chant. So I like some of the words to kind of just be smooth and kind of roll off the tongue nicely. But anyway, we're off topic here, as usual. But going back to mantras. So, in a very general sense, right, a mantra is, at least in Buddhism, right, a mantra is this kind of point of contact, this point of verbal concentration that we may give ourselves during specific times or during specific situations. Sometimes when we're angry or upset or we're trying to, calm the mind or whatever it may be, a mantra is a really good resource to be able to kind of focus your mind, kind of slow your mind, slow your breathing down, kind of normalize everything, and kind of just bring you back to the present moment, bring you back to solidity and focus. And so when we have these mantras, all right, and we have to remember that a mantra, even though sometimes they are in Sanskrit or Pali or in different languages, right, none of that really matters. Because again, there's really no power in the words themselves, which is why sometimes they're translated as spells, right? Because if we think of like a magic spell, it's these magic, concoction of words that magically make something happen, right? And so it's believed that within that spell, the words that are spelled out is what creates the change, is what creates the magic. And that's really not the case, because we can chant or say anything in any language and it would always, for the most part, still say or mean the same, right? It doesn't really matter what language it is or how it's being pronounced or if it's right or wrong, if it's ancient or new age. It doesn't really matter. There's no power within the words themselves. The power is held with the idea, with the intention behind the mantra. And so for the mantras that we would chant during our services, for instance, right, they're all very specific to something very specific. We can take the compassion mantra, for instance, right? The compassion mantra is one of those longer than usual mantras that we have in Buddhism. And the whole thing, could take you just a couple minutes to chant, depending on your speed. But if you try to translate word for word the compassion mantra, it will make 0 sense, right? Because you can translate it. There are most of the words are translatable, right? A lot of times in some mantras, the words themselves don't actually have any meaning. The power within these mantras, quote unquote, is, depending on tradition, your belief, there's certain vibrations and sound frequencies that kind of resonate within ourselves and the universe. And so these specific words or hymns or whatever it may be have that kind of power. And so there's no meaning. It's just a sound that kind of has some sort of power. And so there are a lot of mantras that are kind of like that. They just don't have a direct, exact translation. I've seen a couple translations of the compassion mantra into English, and it's not pretty. Most of it doesn't really make sense. If you look at the words of the compassion mantra, a lot of them refer to, like Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, and, there's some words in there about generosity and compassion and loving kindness and giving, but together it doesn't really make any sense. And it's the same thing with like the Shurangama mantras, right? There are 5 sets of those. Again, these are the ones that we chant in the morning. They like 90% of the words in the Shurangama mantra are real words, right? They are referring to specific bodhisattvas and buddhas and different, celestial beings and specific, historical figures and whatnot. But a lot of other words don't have any meaning, and they're just sound, right? To me, it just sounds like they're fillers, basically, for the mantra. But if we want to have a mantra, we need, and it can be anything, right? Again, a mantra doesn't have to be the sacred, holy sentence or collection of words or sounds, right? A mantra could literally be anything. It could be car or bicycle or airplane or computer or steak or food, whatever it may be, right? It could literally be anything and everything. So don't think, or we shouldn't think, that a mantra has to be a special set of words that have these deep, intellectual, wise meaning to them, right? And it doesn't. It can be if you want it to be, but it really doesn't. So when we have a mantra, whatever it may be, whether we create it ourselves or we're borrowing it from something else, what makes it powerful is the intention behind the mantra. And so, again, going back to the compassion mantra, the compassion mantra, for the most part, is directly associated with Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, which is the Bodhisattva of compassion and loving kindness. And so, as we chant the compassion mantra and we are focusing on the words, we should also be visualizing Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva as well, since he, she, it is the physical manifestation of compassion and loving kindness. And the mantra is a verbal manifestation, right? And a mental manifestation of Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva. So as we chant the mantra, or chant literally anything, in Buddhism at least, and even any other religion, honestly, but whatever we are chanting, we need our focus, our intention, our concentration isn't necessarily on the mantra itself, but what the mantra means and what the mantra stands for, right? Not direct meaning, but what does it stand for? What is the power? What is the intention behind the mantra? And in this case, it's compassion and loving kindness. And so as we're chanting and as we're visualizing Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, we're also trying to invoke and develop those same characteristics of loving kindness and compassion within ourselves. So it's not asking or praying or requesting anything from anybody or anything. It's simply this nice little reminder to tell yourself to focus on compassion, or focus, calming your mind, or slowing down your breath, or paying attention, or being in the moment, or not to react, right? A mantra has limitless, infinite meanings and abilities to do something for you. Anything you want, use a mantra, make up a mantra. So, yeah, that was a lot, and I did go off topic quite a bit, but we need to understand it's important to understand what is a mantra, what is the meaning, the power, the intention behind mantras. Why should we have one, or should we have one? And I think having a mantra is important, especially in times where we may not be doing something. And a lot of times when we're not doing something, what typically happens? What is our typical reaction? Our typical reaction is thinking, oh, I'm bored, I should do something, right? Or if you're doing, just chores, if you're washing the dishes or cleaning dishes or doing laundry or whatever, we always have to have something else going on as well, whether it's music or watching TV or whatever it may be, right? All these are just unnecessary because we can't be with ourselves. We just don't enjoy being with ourselves or just doing nothing. And so for me, at least, whenever I'm in those situations, whether it's, walking down to the temple, to my car, folding laundry, cooking, cleaning, there's always a mantra being recited in my mind. There is always something happening in order for me to ensure that I am focused on what I am doing at the moment that I'm doing it. Because if you don't, then you're going to get distracted. If you're washing dishes or doing laundry, right? And if you don't have things that playing in the background, or even if you do, sometimes that's not enough, right? You may be putting your laundry together, there's TV in the background, there's music coming from the kitchen, but none of that's enough. What else do? You call up your friend, or you call up your family, or whomever, right? So now not only are you doing laundry, but you're also watching TV, listening to music, and talking on the phone. I mean, how many things do we need, honestly, to distract ourselves from ourselves? It's crazy. It's crazy. So, in those types of moments and situations, it's important to have a mantra. Use that mantra to bring your focus back to the present moment into what you're doing. Because even if it's just folding laundry or cleaning, right? You can fold laundry and clean in a lazy, kind of just superficial, nonchalant way, or you can do it correctly, where things are more organized. They look prettier, they're easier to find and put away, right? So we have options, and these options are available to us depending on what prior option we choose. Do we choose laziness and 5 to 6 different other distractions other than ourselves? Or do we choose being in the moment, focusing on a mantra, and doing what we're supposed to be doing correctly? So, mantras are good to have. They're good to recite. They're good to remember. But don't think that a mantra is this magical set of words that are going to fix our problems, that's going to take away our suffering or take away our anxiety or our crazy, monkey mind. It's none of that. Like everything else in Buddhism, mantra is simply a tool. And you use this tool in order to build yourself up. Right? A tool is what? A tool is a gadget of some sort to either fix something or to create something. And so we're doing that for the exact same reason. We are fixing our unstable mind by allowing a mantra to take hold of us rather than the TV, rather than music and talking on the phone and 5,000 other distractions. We're using that as a tool to fix that habitual habit that we have. But then we're also using it to build ourselves up, to develop our mind, to develop our concentration and focus. One of the main reasons why meditation, or people who meditate and aren't able to focus or concentrate on their object of meditation for very long, is because they do just that when they're doing their laundry or doing their chores. They have 5,000 other things happening. And so they're never used to just doing one thing at a time. No one's ever used to just being with themselves or being with whatever activity or thing that they're doing. There always has to be 5,000 other things to do. And because of that, our mind is, of course, a muscle. So it gets used to this habit. It gets used to this type of training that you're essentially giving it to every single day of your life. And so when you go and sit down and try to void all that muscle memory in one sitting, it's never going to happen. And it's never going to happen even if you've meditated for 10 years, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. You could be meditating for 100 years. But if you're not also trying to concentrate your mind off the cushion, then it doesn't matter for how many lifetimes you meditate, it's never going to work and you'll never succeed. You'll never be able to accomplish true meditation, true samadhi. And so we have to remember that if we want to develop our practice, develop our concentration, our meditation, we have to apply the teachings and all the practices that the Buddha has given us outside of the temple, off the cushion. We have to use it in every little thing that we do. Monks and nuns have 53 gathas or 52 gathas, right? These little mantras that we memorize as novices. And these gathas, these little mantras, are for all these different activities that we do throughout the day. Waking up, there's a gatha. Putting on our clothes, there's a gatha. Taking the first steps out of bed, there's a gatha. Brushing your teeth, there's a gatha. Changing your clothes, walking, sitting, eating, drinking, praying or sitting down for meditation. Every little activity you think we would need to be doing, there is a gatha for that. right? And there's a gatha for that because this is essentially making sure that we are being concentrated and we're being mindful in the present moment for whatever that we do. And if you do that, then you will not need the TV running in the background, music playing, or talking on the phone while you're doing simple tasks like cleaning or washing the dishes or folding clothes. That was a lot. Again, I went overboard and I went over my time. But my genuine advice is to, whether you want to create your own mantra out of a set of words that may or may not make sense, or borrow one from Buddhism or any other religion or whatever it may be, use that mantra. Find something or some mantra that is special to you, that kind of just has this nice little warm feeling inside of you whenever you chant it out loud, or just mentally chant it. That way you can use that for whatever you do. When you're walking to your car in the morning, when you're changing your clothes, when you're showering, when you're brushing your teeth, and you're getting ready for work or school or bed or whatever it may be, right? Instead of allowing yourself to make use of all these different distractions, allow yourself to make use of this mantra and use that mantra instead, and chant the mantra and love the mantra. I have a mantra tattooed on me. That's how important I believe a mantra is and can be, for regardless of what you're trying to accomplish or succeed. So mantras are good. Find one that kind of suits your soul, soothes your soul, and one that you feel comfortable with, one that kind of just, you'll know. It's one of those things where it may take time to find, right? And there are lots of different ones out there, and people who typically come to me and ask about mantras, and they're always asking, they're always in a different language. I'm like, well, yeah, because it's these cultures that make up these mantras. The Western culture doesn't believe in this kind of stuff, so of course we don't have mantras of our own, in a religious sense, kind of like that. But even if it's a different language, if they are real words, you can translate them or find a translation and use the English version of it if need be, right? But don't worry on making sure that mantras are pronounced right if they're in like Pali or Sanskrit or Chinese or whatever it may be, right? No one is gonna know unless you share it, right? Or if you can find exactly how it's being pronounced, it doesn't matter. The pronunciation is irrelevant. The language that it's in is irrelevant. None of that is important. There's no power in the word or the mantra itself. It is the meaning you ascribe to it. It's the meaning and the intention you put behind the words that give it power. That is mantras. Thank you for listening. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha.